Thanks to God for my Redeemer, thanks for all thou dost provide. Thanks
2 Corinthians chapter 7. But the other one has to do with the question that was asked last time. Didn't want to take any more time from our Bible class lesson, so I decided I would put it into a written form. And if you happen to have any questions more about it, why, I'm more than happy to discuss it with you. But discussing it last time ended up making it possible so that we covered one entire verse of chapter 7 last time. So we will try to do much better this evening. Yes. Well, I was hoping for 3, but you know. All right. Well, of course, the context here, very basically, is that the Apostle Paul is making the attempt to try to make things right with the brethren in Corinth. Not that he's had anything to apologize for, but he apparently has had to write them a rather severe letter and get them to try to call them to repentance. In fact, he's going to be making reference to that in chapter 7 here. But, of course, if you happen to be rebuking someone, not everybody's going to be happy. And as a consequence, Paul is kind of working on trying to kind of reconcile folks, try to get them to feel better and get together and embrace him again and all that kind of stuff. And so that's really been a great deal of what Paul has been trying to do over the last, several verses, maybe a couple of chapters or so. And chapter 7 just really kind of winds some of that up. For the sake of reviewing once again, let's read through just very briefly. 2 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul says, "Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Make room for us in your hearts. We wronged no one, we corrupted no one, we took advantage of no one. I do not speak to condemn you, for I have said before that you're in our hearts to die together and to live together. Great is my confidence in you. Great is my boasting on your behalf. I'm filled with comfort. I'm overflowing with joy in all our affliction. For even when we came to Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, but we were afflicted on every side, conflicts without, fears within. But God, who comforts the depressed, comforted us by the coming of Titus. And not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted in you, as he reported to us your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more. For though I caused you sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it, though I did regret it, for I see that the letter caused you sorrow, though only for a while. I now rejoice, not that you were made sorrowful, but that you were made sorrowful to the point of repentance. For you were made sorrowful according to the will of God, so that you might not suffer loss in anything through us. For the sorrow that's according to the will of God produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. But the sorrow of the world produces death. For behold, what earnestness, this very thing, this godly sorrow has produced in you. What vindication of yourselves, what indignation, what fear, what longing, what zeal, what avenging of wrong. In everything you demonstrated yourselves to be innocent in the matter. So, although I wrote you, it was not for the sake of the offender, nor for the sake of the one offended, but that your earnestness on our behalf might be made known to you in the sight of God. For this reason we have been comforted. And besides our comfort, we rejoiced even more for the joy of Titus, because his spirit has been refreshed by you all. For if in anything I have boasted to him about you, I was not put to shame. But as we spoke all things to you in truth, so also our boasting before Titus proved to be the truth. His affection abounds all the more toward you, as he remembers the obedience of you all, how you received him with fear and trembling. I rejoice that in everything I have confidence in you. Paul is essentially trying to, once again, try to reconcile. I mean, this has been if you recall, even back as far as chapter 5, the latter part of chapter 5, he's been talking about reconciliation. Chapter 6 has been talking about it as well. And in verse 2 and following, he's talking about making room for us in your hearts. What does he mean by that, do you suppose? Make room for us in your hearts. Yeah. Yeah, it's like.
First of all, that Paul's foremost goal for them is to become more Christ-like.
Right.
And that any efforts on his part to change them would be for the better, not for the worse.
Right. Paul was afraid that the things that he had said had put a rift between him and the Corinthians. And so that's why he's saying, make room for us in your hearts. He's here talking not really quite so much about emotions, but he is talking somewhat about emotions. But he's basically saying, I don't want to be persona non grata. I don't want to be someone who's not welcome in the church there anymore. Make room for us in your hearts, he says. We wronged no one. We corrupted no one. We took advantage of no one. Possibly these might have been accusations by some of his opponents and so forth, but he's telling them, look, I haven't done you any wrong, I haven't done you any harm. And I really want to be sure that you are reconciled back to me again. I do not speak, verse 3, to condemn you, for I have said before that you're in our hearts to die together and to live together. What happens? What's the initial response that most people have whenever it is that they are the object of criticism?
They tend to offer it back.
Well, they want to offer it back. Why? Because you hurt my feelings by your criticism. You don't like me anymore. And so, we get our hackles up, as the saying goes, and the walls go up and all that sort of stuff. Paul is saying, look, really, make room for us in your heart. I didn't speak to condemn you. I spoke for what reason? Correct you, to help you out. Of course, he's talking to adults, but we might find ourselves maybe having a similar conversation even with children, right? When we correct them. Because what do children think whenever you've corrected them or rebuked them? You don't love me anymore, right? You're so mean, and all that other sort of stuff. And Paul is saying, really, did I wrong you? No, of course I didn't. I didn't speak to condemn you. I've said before, you were in our hearts to die together and to live together. I love you guys. I'm not saying this for the purpose of hurting your feelings, but the correction was absolutely necessary. In fact, he goes on to say, great is my confidence in you. Great is my boasting on your behalf. I'm filled with comfort. I'm overflowing with joy in all our affliction. Now, of course, that's not necessarily the way Paul felt a little while ago, because as we get a little bit further into the chapter, what was going on with Paul before he met Titus? He was, he was very anxious. Yeah. Note, let's see, down to verse 8. For though I caused you sorrow by my letter, I don't regret it, although I did regret it, for I see the letter caused you sorrow, though only for a little while. Where does he talk about? Verse 5. For even when we came into Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, but we were afflicted on every side. Conflicts without, fears within. What was Paul going through? Just a whole lot of fun. When he talks about conflicts without, what do you suppose he might be making reference to? Persecution of various kinds and sorts. And what were the fears within? Yeah, Right. He was worried about them. And in fact, in other places, I think it's a little bit later in 2 Corinthians, he ends up talking about how it is the weight of all the churches is really burdening his heart. He's worried about all of them, wanting them to remain faithful and so forth. So, here's Paul. Before he met up with Titus, while he was still in Macedonia, before Titus came along, he was pretty anxious about things overall. But now, verse 4, great is my confidence in you, great is my boasting on your behalf. I'm filled with comfort, I'm overflowing with joy in all our affliction. What do you suppose he's making reference to when he talks about, I'm on the wrong slide, Pam, I'm sorry. What do you suppose he's making reference to when he says, great is my confidence in you, great is my boasting on your behalf? What do you suppose he's making reference to here? Thinking about the context, what did Paul just got through writing? A severe letter, a letter full of correction. What do you suppose Paul was hoping whenever he wrote this letter of correction? That they'd be corrected. That's what he was hoping about. And that's possibly what he might have even told Titus. What we read a little bit later on, about how it was that everything that he had told Titus had turned out to be true. So what do we suppose that perhaps he might have told Titus? I'm writing this severe letter, or I've written this severe letter, and he apparently has told Titus, I want you to go check up on the Corinthians. Now, I'm speaking as if I'm Paul, and we don't know what he actually said. I'm paraphrasing what I'm imagining he might have said. He might have been telling Titus, listen, I'd like for you to go check on them because I think they're going to do what I'm telling them to do, but I don't know. I'm not really sure. But, these are good people. They want to do the right thing. I've corrected them before, but this particular time when I corrected them, I was a bit severe, so I've been anxious about this. Please go check on them. Had he sort of boasted about them? Yeah, he had. But was he still anxious about them? Well, yeah, he was. Trust but verify. That's right. So that's kind of what was going on with Paul's mind and heart. And that's why he says, great was my confidence in you, great is my boasting. And now, because of what Titus has told him, I'm filled with comfort. I'm overflowing with joy, even in all of our affliction, which again probably is making reference to some unknown persecution or difficulty he was having in his life. For even, again, getting back to verse 5, when we came into Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, but we were afflicted on every side, conflicts within, fears without. We talked about persecution, but we also know that was Paul did Paul have a regular income like modern day located preachers? No. What did he do? What did he do to make money generally? He's tent making. And I would imagine that maybe there might be obviously a market for that. But when you're moving around all the time, you suppose making a tent takes a little time? I would imagine so. But he's moving around all the time. So Paul's probably doing a lot more spending than he is earning. So he's probably down to his last few pennies or drachmas or whatever. And there he is trying to kind of get along on nearly nothing. And he has this some persecution perhaps going on in his life. We know that he had some sort of physical affliction of one, he calls it a thorn in the flesh. Paul had his, if we take a look at people like Paul and perhaps we see Paul as standing like a statue, proud and all. The likelihood is Paul must have felt about half the time pretty beat down just because of the fact that he was afflicted in all these ways. Now, he goes on to say that he nevertheless ends up being beaten down but not destroyed, and we've read through all of that already, and that he looks forward to heaven, and so he's not discouraged and so forth. Nevertheless, he actually does, did you notice in here, he actually does kind of refer to himself in sort of an oblique way as being depressed sometimes. Here was a guy that was battling through all kinds of affliction. But in the midst of all that affliction, he says, joy. overflowing with joy, even in all of the affliction that he was suffering. That is probably, that's one of the guesses with regard to what his thorn in the flesh was. No one knows for sure, but to be between you and me, that's my guess too. My guess is that he probably had very poor eyesight. We don't know why. Maybe he always had poor eyesight, or maybe his vision on the road to Damascus somehow or the other caused it. We just don't know. Sure. Exactly. We really don't know exactly what it was, but it was something that Paul said appears to have been holding him back. And we're going to get to this a little bit later when we get into later chapters of 2 Corinthians. But here where he talks about this thorn in the flesh, he talks about how it is that he prayed 3 times that the Lord would take it away from him. Why do you suppose? I don't know about you. I can imagine how the prayer might go. Lord, if you would simply take this away, I'd be able to do so much more for you. I'd be able to write more, perhaps. I'd be able to get around better. I wouldn't stump my toe all the time, if it would happen to be sight. Or if it was, something else. I can imagine the prayer would go something along that line. But what did Paul say he discovered through all of that? What was God's answer to him? His grace is sufficient. Power is perfected in weakness. The light dawns over Paul's mind. I get it now. So, I'm not worried about the weakness anymore. In fact, I kind of glory in my weakness, because through my weakness, God is able and will do powerful, wonderful things. So anyway, I have gone down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I'm getting back on track again. The point, at least here, is that he was afflicted on every side, but he had joy even in all of that. But God, verse 6, who comforts the depressed. Paul was depressed sometimes? Yeah, apparently so. Wouldn't you be? I mean, there were times when Paul, you might recall, prays. I think he asks the Ephesians, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he asked the Ephesians to pray for him that he might preach boldly. I always thought Paul was always bold, but apparently not. Apparently he didn't always feel bold, maybe because of the thorn in the flesh, maybe because he was depressed. We don't know. But Paul knew he needed to be bold, but didn't always feel like it, I suppose. He was asking even, he was depressed. But God who comforts the depressed, what was that again? I'm sorry.
My book says
discouraged. And, that still works out. He's discouraged. What's the feeling? Can you describe, we don't describe emotions very often, but what does it mean to be discouraged? Describe the emotion for me.
Well, first of all, you're saddened for the circumstances.
Yeah. It's a feeling of sadness.
You feel inadequate of changing them.
Yeah. When you're discouraged, you obviously had grander hopes for something to occur, but those hopes were dashed, didn't come to pass. That causes sadness, sometimes maybe even hopelessness. Depression seems like that would kind of go along with it.
Well, that would lead to depression.
Certainly. So God, who ends up comforting the depressed or comforting the discouraged, either way, comforted us by the coming of Titus. And, verse 7, not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted in you. As he reported to us, your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me. So I rejoiced even more. Yes, sir.
I think any of us could see how you could become depressed. Say you go somewhere, you're trying to talk people into something, and instead they take you out and they stone you to death.
Yeah.
Which they thought, but then they didn't kill him. I mean, you would think any of us would get up from there and not, you're not going to feel happy.
No.
You're going to possibly feel depressed or disappointed.
Yeah, certainly. It discouraged, disillusioned, all sorts of things, stuff like that. I can remember as a young preacher sharing the gospel with someone who ultimately ended up just refusing it, rejecting it. And here's the thing. I thought I had done absolutely everything right. We'd studied through the book of Acts. I'd shown the Jewel Miller film strips at the time, gone through the book of Acts, gone through the book of Romans. I thought, man, this guy, surely he's going to be baptized just any day now. And then he comes in to study one time and says, I went to a different church last Sunday and I'll be seeing you later. Bye. I walked away from that meeting feeling like, I don't think I need to be in ministry. because here, here was the false notion that I had. The gospel is such good news. It is so good. How could anyone say no to it? That was what I thought. If I only presented it correctly, surely they would say, yes, show me the baptistry. That's what I was thinking. Came to find out that's not the way it goes. Fortunately, there were some things that God provided for me that helped me not to be discouraged for very long. But the point was, I guess, is that, to your point, Tom, you can really get discouraged from people when you're kind of preaching your heart out and doing the best you can to try to share the good news with somebody, and all you get in return is either no, or in a much worse circumstance like Paul, you get stoned for it. You get punished for it. Kind of makes you wonder, Man, I thought this was good news. But of course, that's probably the reason why it is that remember earlier in 2 Corinthians, he talks about this triumphal entry kind of metaphor, where he talks about how the spell is, for one, from death to death, but to the other, life to life. Which is say, in other words, the gospel has something of a stench to some people and something of a perfume to others. Just kind of the way that it goes. Yes, sir.
Well, the book says that narrow is the road to heaven, and there's a big highway going to hell. So that kind of tells you that no matter how many people you talk to, you're going to have a lot of rejections.
That's true. I'll tell you what was going through my tiny mind as a young minister is that all those people that were going to hell simply hadn't heard, or they had heard it, but they'd heard it from some pitiful proclaimer like I was. That's what I was thinking. Now, I'll tell you what helped me out. There was a bulletin article that a friend of mine wrote. He was an older preacher, and I guess you could say after a fashion he served as sort of a short-term mentor to me. But anyway, he wrote an article, a bulletin article on the parable of the sower. To make a long story short, he pointed out that the parable of the sower is what we have named it. In fact, I'm sorry, it's not what we did not name it. We have named every other parable that Jesus ever did. We named it. The parable of the sower is the only parable that Jesus himself named. If we were naming it, what would we have named it? How do we usually teach it? Parable of the soils, perhaps. That's the way we probably would call it, because that's the way we always teach it. We end up teaching about, asking the question, because this is a perfect kind of a preacher outline. What kind of soil are you? That's how we would preach it. But Jesus called the parable the sower. And if it's the parable of the sower, and that's really the main focus, what do you suppose Jesus was trying to say with the parable? You're going to sow seed sometimes on the roadside. And sometimes you're going to sow seed on rocky soil, and sometimes you're going to sow it in weedy soil, and sometimes you're going to sow it on good soil. Your job is to sow. The seed will always do its job if it's given a chance.
It's the same seed.
It's the same seed.
Kind of tells you 25%, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. But it's saying, like, 3/4 of the time, whenever you preach, It's either not going to be hurt or it's not going to be permanent. That's sort of the idea of the stony soil and the weedy soil. They do become Christians, but then what happens to them? They fall away because of persecution or fall away because of the cares of this world.
Horse and water scenario.
Pardon?
The horse and water scenario.
Yes. Yeah. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And, but that particular article helped me out enormously because I thought, oh, yeah. So, anyway, enough of my personal stories. But anyway, you can certainly get discouraged if you're preaching or trying to teach someone and they say no to you. It can be very discouraging.
And after his critical letter, or how he worded it, but it's not like he could send out a group text to kind of gauge their temperature after that.
It's true.
And get some instant feedback.
Right. So he was really very worried, and that's the reason he sent Titus there. So anyway, on his travels, when you kind of take a look at the book of Acts and take a look at some of the other letters he wrote and so forth, you end up coming to the conclusion that he left from Ephesus and decided instead of going directly over sea to Corinth, he decided to take the long route and kind of go up through Troas and over to Macedonia and then come down again into Corinth. That's what he ended up doing. But he apparently, when he had sent Titus to Corinth to find out how things were going, he apparently said, Titus, I want you to meet me in Macedonia. And so when Paul arrives in Macedonia and he's looking everywhere for Titus and Titus isn't showing up, what do you suppose might be going through Paul's mind? Well, something's wrong. Maybe he got mugged on the road.
Maybe he got discouraged being there, how bad it was.
Exactly, and just decided to give up. Or maybe the brethren were so ugly they did something ugly to him. You never know. Who knows what's happening? So Paul was really worried about him for a bit. But apparently when he did come and did finally meet up with him, why, he was the bearer of wonderful tidings about how it was that the brethren in Corinth longed for him, mourned over their sin, were zealous for him, so that he says, I was even happier. For though I caused you, verse 8, sorrow by my letter, I do not regret it. Though I did regret it. You ever sent a letter or a text or something and you thought, and send, and you went, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe that's what Paul was thinking, I don't know. But he wrote this letter to try to correct them and then had it sent off and then thought about it more and he was kind of, I don't know, maybe a little anxious about his wording or whatever. But he says...
send what he sent because they needed to hear what he had to say.
Exactly.
But he's like, maybe it was just too harsh.
Maybe I could have worded it differently or
right.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. But he says, I don't really regret it, although I did at the time. But now, especially verse 9, I rejoice that you were made not that you were made sorrowful, but that you were made sorrowful to the point of repentance. Which kind of leads us to, I think, a discussion then, right, of what repentance actually is. Now, I preached about it, a couple of weeks ago, I guess now. But we talked about this idea, in the sermon at least, I talked about this idea of how it is that you can be sorry, but not really sorry to the point of repentance. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Perhaps you remember my illustration of driving too fast through a neighborhood and getting caught by a cop. Oh, I'm sorry I got caught. But now I'm really late. And so as soon as the cop's out of sight, boom, off I go. There's really no repentance there. It's just that I'm sorry. But if on the other hand, I almost end up hitting a kid because I'm going too fast, okay, once my heart has stopped beating outside of my chest, I'm probably going to go under the speed limit now because I know there's a bunch of kids that are playing and they're not watching what they're doing. So anyway, all that said, that's the kind of sorrow that leads to repentance. They were made sorrowful, he says, according to the will of God, so that you might not suffer loss in anything through us. For sorrow, he goes on to say, that is according to the will of God, produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. But the sorrow of the world produces death. And I think that's a really super important point, I guess, to make and to give some thought to. There's two kinds of sorrows. One is a kind of sorrow that changes your life. The other kind of sorrow is one that is sorry that there's consequences, but it's not really going to change how they act. It's not going to change what they do. For behold, look at what this repentance without regret did to them. Is behold what earnestness this very thing, this godly sorrow has produced in you. What vindication of yourselves. What is vindication?
To show that you were correct, that what you did was done for the right reason.
Yeah. That's basically, that vindication is, I was right all along. Or at least, I wasn't wrong. And in this particular case, apparently there were some things that Paul had heard might have been going on that were not, in fact, going on. And now Titus had reported, and they were earnest in trying to make sure that Paul knew that they had not been doing that. What vindication of yourselves, he says. What was it? Indignation. What do you suppose the indignation's all about? What's indignation? I'm trying to catch up to my slides here. What's indignation? I'm indignant.
Kind of disdain
A little bit. If someone accuses you of something that is way beneath you, how might you feel? Indignant. Why, you're nothing but a low-down thieving jerk. You're a prostitute. You're a, anything along that line that's a sin or some sort of a deed that's like way beneath you. You might feel indignant. This is beneath my dignity. How you've insulted my dignity. This is sort of the idea that's behind it. And so indignation, he says, was one of the other responses that he had to, or they had to Paul's letter. They were indignant about some things, but not necessarily in a bad way, but apparently there was some things that had been reported to Paul that apparently maybe exaggerations, you never know, but apparently this was a part of what was going on in the church at the time. What fear? What kind of fear is he talking about here? Maybe the fear that I'm going to hell, that I am doing something wrong. Apparently this was something that apparently they also expressed. Did we do something wrong? Are we standing unfaithful and condemned before God? There was fear that was involved in all of that. What longing, he says. What zeal. What's longing in this particular case? What does longing usually mean? Yeah. Looking forward to, and it oftentimes has to do with looking forward to someone or something that you really like or really love. You long for it. We long to get to heaven. If you've been separated from your spouse for a while, you might long to see your spouse. So it's that sort of idea. In this particular case, who were they longing for, apparently?
They're wanting to see Paul
Wanted to
again.
see Paul again.
And make him assured that everything's okay.
Yeah. And zeal. What zeal you showed? What does he mean by that? What is he probably referring to?
Excitement.
Yeah. And really paying attention and being excited about something and really getting it done. Being someone who really puts their back into it, shall we say. Really gives some effort to it. In particular, probably what he's making reference to, you'll notice, of course, there is the implication in the very next verse there that there may have been something of another withdrawal of fellowship situation. Notice what he says here. Although I wrote you, it was not for the sake of the offender or the sake of the one offended, but that your earnestness on our behalf might be made known to you in the sight of God. It doesn't say there was withdrawal of fellowship, but apparently there was an offender and an offendee. And he is talking now about zeal. So possibly what might he have been talking about? They really took care of this. Paul may have, in this severe letter, he may have said in a very similar way to and apparently this is a different situation. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, there's the fellow who has taken his father's wife, slept with his father's wife. That guy says, get rid of it, and so forth. Apparently this is a different situation because that's already been taken care of. And besides that, an offender and offendee doesn't really fit the situation. True, yes. Charles?
I have a note here about indignation against the deed that disgraced the church.
Yeah. And perhaps that's kind of what he's referring to there. The whole point, at least, is that they really ended up truly repenting. They did whatever it took in order to make things right all the way around. And for this reason, he says, I have, in fact, been comforted. And it's kind of an interesting thing that he says here in verse 12, right? It was not for the sake of the offender, nor for the sake of the one offended, but that your earnestness on our behalf might be made known to, what's the next word you expect?
You think me.
Yeah. But instead, it's you. What do you suppose Paul is meaning by this? Just in case you really thought that maybe I didn't really have any more influence, part of the reason I wrote this letter to you and asked you to do certain things was so that you would know the earnestness on our behalf might be made known to you, and that you would realize the love and respect that you really do have for me after it's all said and done. For this reason, he goes on to say, we have in fact been comforted. Titus, even his spirit has been refreshed because of the spirit that they had. Which kind of, at least on the handout I mentioned here, what does peace in the congregation feel like? And you can look those verses up. But apparently, although this was a church that at one point, had been very divided, apparently was not divided anymore. It was now back united once again, and that this had refreshed Titus even. Because certainly conflict in the congregation is going to feel anything but refreshing. Some of you perhaps have been in a congregation that had some conflict going on. That's not any fun at all. Anyway, Paul's boast about the Corinthian church had not put him to shame. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of boasting about someone or recommending someone only to find out that they were not exactly what you thought they were. That's happened to me before. I've offered a recommendation to somebody and they ended up kind of making me embarrassed because I recommended them and they turned out to be kind of a disappointment. But that's not the way it was with regard to Titus. Verse 14, if in anything I boasted to him about you, I was not put to shame. But as we spoke all things to you in truth, so also our boasting before Titus proved to be true. And his affection abounds all the more toward you as he remembers the obedience of you all, how you received him with fear and trembling. I rejoice that in everything I have confidence in you. What a blessing, what a relief Paul must have had as he is writing all this. I was really afraid that things had gone sideways and that you guys were going to hate me and all this other stuff. As it turned out, that's not the way it was. Make room for me in your hearts. I love you guys. It seems to be kind of what he's saying. Well, next time, not next week, but next time, we'll be starting in chapter 8, which is a whole different kettle of fish. We'll be talking about generosity and so forth. In fact, at least in the New American Standard, it tells us to be liberal. But maybe not the way you're thinking. I'm going to shift over from Bible class mode then to devotional mode. Of course, we ended up taking a long look at the idea of repentance, and just noted that there really are a couple of kinds of repentance. There's the sorrow of the world, which really doesn't change anything. And there's the sorrow that's a godly sorrow that leads to repentance and a change of life. Forgiveness has always been founded upon repentance, which means that just feeling bad about doing something wrong really isn't enough. You need to feel bad enough about it that you change. Now, of course, in the Christian life, we need to know and to understand that it really is a growing kind of an enterprise, I guess you could say. No one comes up out of the waters of baptism as mature as a 50-year-old Christian. It's just not the way it works. We all grow. We find new things on a regular basis of things we ought to change. And in fact, a lot of new Christians coming up out of the waters of baptism know that they have a boatload of things to change. So they end up trying to take a little bit here, a little bit there, and try to grow as best they can. My point, however, is that the kind of forgiveness that we're looking for from God is always based upon repentance. And perhaps if this evening there are things in your life that you know you need to change, but perhaps you've been putting off the change, we encourage you not to put it off any longer, but to offer your heart back to the Lord. Have a real sorrow, a sorrow that changes things. All that starts in your heart, and it leads to making a plan for how you're going to change. This evening, if you'd like for us to be praying about that for you, we stand ready to pray with you and for you. This evening, then, if you have need to respond to God's generous call, we encourage you to come forward while we stand and sing.
Thanks to God for my Redeemer, thanks for all